2024 wasn't just another year, it was a reckoning. As the West stumbled under the weight of its own crises, the East seized the moment. From the historic expansion of BRICS to America's inward turn, from Europe's energy and identity crises to the roaring assertiveness of Africa and Asia, every moment in 2024 told the same story. The world we knew is no longer the world we live in. The war and brutality in Gaza escalated unchecked. Sudan descended further into chaos, and Syria fell to the rebels. All under the watch of a paralyzed international system, unable or unwilling to intervene. 2024 wasn't just a story of nations competing. It was the unraveling of old systems, the rise of new powers, and the dawn of a multipolar world. On April 10th, a Russian plane arrived in Niger's capital, Niamey. The plane was reportedly carrying Russian military trainers and equipment, including Russian air defense systems. Following the arrival of Russian military equipment and advisors, hundreds of protesters gathered in Niamey to demand the withdrawal of American forces. US troops have been coordinating their operations across West and North Africa from Niger for over a decade. But the growing public sentiment against its military presence forced the United States to pull back 1,000 military personnel out of the country and shut down its operations. Countries across the Sahel region, stretching from Senegal to the Red Sea, are now turning towards Russia for security assistance. Russian mercenaries have supported the Burkina Faso and Mali in their fight against insurgent groups in the recent past. Now Russia is doubling down its focus on the region by tightening its hold over several Sahel states and looking for new partners. But Russia is not alone in the quest. While Russia uses military and diplomatic incentives to attract and retain partners on the continent, its close ally China uses developmental projects and credit lines instead. As the West lost African pastures to Putin, things were not looking so good at home either. Donald Trump's re-election to the White House and his isolationist America First policies threatened to undermine key international alliances and institutions. But to be fair, America had already lost much of the global clout and moral high grounds through the events that preceded the presidential elections. The war in Ukraine is nowhere near its end. The US-led West has supplied over $300 billion in military aid and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine since February 2022. Apart from it, the West has placed Russia under heavy sanctions in a bid to cripple its economy. The West has so far failed on both the fronts. Ukraine remains far from victory, and Russia's economy remains resilient to Western pressures. Instead, it's the American and European economies that are suffering. With energy prices soaring in Europe, the nations are reeling under cost of living crises. The governments have now started to drag their feet on more aid as popular support for Ukraine wanes out. Adding to America's Ukraine woes, Washington also remained entangled in another war that has drained billions out of its treasury. The Israel-Hamas war has lingered on for over a year now, with Israel razing much of the Gaza enclave to ruins, even as the death toll mounted in Gaza. And then in Lebanon, the US kept supplying more and more bombs to Israel. The US was clearly on the wrong side of history. Even those at home realized it. All of this happened before Trump's re-election. Trump's return to White House adds a new set of challenges for America's global standing. The transatlantic bond between North America and Europe, which collectively forms the West, is set to come under strain. The risk of an internal trade war is real. In fact, with Trump's mockery of Canada and its Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, coupled with the threat of a 25% tariff, the trade wars have already begun. It's only a matter of time before Trump widened his tariff wars to Europe and rest of the world. Dominant powers in Europe are fighting their own battles at home, with governments in France and Germany losing popular support. A politically weakened Europe is in no position to fight the battles Trump is set to bring along with him. If Trump's previous term is any indication, even NATO's future hangs in the balance. Trump has previously questioned the military alliance's relevance. His commitment to Ukraine also remains fragile and uncertain. During his first term, Trump withdrew from key global agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, the Iran nuclear deal, and the World Health Organization. Most of these agreements and institutions were created and led by the United States itself. The rest of the world took note and started looking for alternatives to the existing systems. 4 years later, Trump is back with an even stronger mandate and popular support. And with back-to-back failures, first in Ukraine, then in Gaza, and now in Syria, the traditional global institutions lie in tatters. Talking about international institutions and their diminishing relevance, the year 2024 was one of the worst for the United Nations since its inception. No one relied on UN for resolving conflicts and ending wars. With great power politics dominating much of its history, the UN has consistently struggled to end conflicts and secure world peace. So the failures in Ukraine and the Middle East were not unprecedented. What was particularly striking, however, was the UN's shortfall in fulfilling one of its fundamental roles, delivering humanitarian aid. The year saw almost 2 million people in Gaza grappling with one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent memory. Despite the dire need, Israeli forces allowed only a small fraction of the required humanitarian assistance to reach civilian population. Obstructions like these have led to catastrophic levels of food insecurity, with nearly 500,000 people facing starvation and critical shortages. The story in Sudan was no different. This year, the failures of UN went even beyond being unable to deliver aid. 2024 was the deadliest year for UN aid workers, with over 280 killed in Gaza alone. 22 others were killed in Sudan. Even active UN peacekeepers came under attack this year as Israel invaded parts of southern Lebanon. Multiple instances were reported in the last 2 months of active war where UNIFIL troops were shot at either directly or were forced to leave their posts by the Israeli troops. Israel's impunity to challenge even the UN peacekeepers emanates from limitless US support. The United States, bound by Jewish influence and compulsions at home, can ill afford to withdraw support from Israel. But American support is now coming at the expense of institutions like UN itself. When the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against top Israeli officials, including the sitting Prime Minister, the White House openly rejected the court's decision. With contradictions like these, it is only natural for other nations to seek leadership in new global institutions like the BRICS and the G20, shrugging off the dated and toothless governance systems of the past. The biggest event showcasing the shift of power was the BRICS summit, hosted by the Russian president in Kazan. Putin is at the center, with leaders of 24 emerging economies by his side. Their collective message to the West was as loud as it could be. The non-Western countries want to engage with Russia, no matter how forcefully the West forbids it. Since it invaded Ukraine, the West began to treat Russia as an outcast. The International Criminal Court's arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin significantly curtailed his international travel as well. Against this backdrop, having the leaders almost half of the world's population by his side came as a shot in the arm for Putin. Initially a 4-member bloc, the BRICS finally took shape in 2010, with South Africa joining Brazil, Russia, India and China. The composition remained as it was for the next 14 years. Then, in a big bang expansion this year, the bloc approved 5 new members. The Kazan summit was the first ever meeting of the BRICS Plus, with leaders from Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran and UAE in attendance. Saudi Arabia is yet to formalize its membership, but its foreign minister attended the summit nonetheless. The inclusion of Iran is particularly noteworthy. Iran is one of the most sanctioned nations in the world, with the West, especially the United States, remaining hell-bent on destroying its economy and curtailing its nuclear ambition. The state of Israel, in collusion with the West, has significantly eroded Tehran's regional footing by eliminating much of its proxy militias in the region. By embracing Iran in such times, BRICS has delivered a resounding challenge to Western economic dominance and sanctions regime. It's a win for BRICS as well. When measured at purchasing power parity, the new expanded BRICS now represent 35% of global GDP and roughly 45% of the world's population. With the addition of Iran and the United Arab Emirates, the bloc now accounts for almost 30% of global oil output. The member states discussed a new currency along with establishing trade frameworks of their own, moving away from the dollar-dominated systems. But the idea of a world moving away from dollar irked the US President-elect Donald Trump. Trump has threatened a 100% tariff on nations ditching the dollar. He has specially warned the BRICS nations against the creation of any other alternative currency for international trade. Obviously, while doing so, he has only reinforced the concerns over weaponization of the dollar and has given the world all the more reason to ditch the dollar. The story of 2024 wasn't merely a tale of East versus West or the collapse of a single power bloc. It marked the dawn of multipolarity. A world no longer tethered to a singular axis of influence, but driven by diverse, competitive, and cooperative dynamics. As we move into 2025, the question is no longer whether this realignment will succeed, but how the nations will navigate this era of profound transformation. The choices made today will not only define the next decade, but will also shape the global order for generations to come.